recording as well.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone.
All right, we'll give it a few moments as folks start joining us. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a few moments. We're waiting for more folks to sign in and join us.
All right, Nancy, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, fantastic. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Equity Talks for Staff, by Staff, Summer Edition. Today's topic is Social Justice 201, Allying Actions, Discomfort, and Divestment. I'll make a disclaimer here. We do have closed captioning turned on, and we want to put it out there that closed captioning may not always capture precisely everything that we say. My name is Nancy Magpusau. I work at the Cross Cultural Center. I use she, her, hers, gender pronouns, and I'm also a member of the Pan-Asian Staff Association.
Hi, my name is Izzy Narvaez. I use she, her, her pronouns, and I'm the office manager and affiliates program coordinator at the Cross Cultural Center.
All right, we look forward to engaging and connecting with you today during our webinar.
To start off with, we wanted to take a moment to recognize, oh, Nancy, if you can go back a slide. To recognize the land and original people of the Kumeyaay Nation, where UC San Diego campus is located, even though we're not all of us may be on campus right now. And in recognition of ongoing social injustices and actions that transform our awareness to create structural change. So if you'll join me in a moment of silence to recognize both of these things, and we'll get started in just a moment. I did see, thank you for joining me in that moment of silence. I saw a chat that the screen is blurred for folks. It might be the internet connection it's blurred on everyone's screen. I know mine is a little pixelated, but yeah. Nancy, would you like me to take over sharing?
Sure, you can try sharing your screen. Okay. Yeah, we'll try that.
Give me 1 second while I pull up the slides on this laptop. Thank you everyone for your patience and for letting us know that it's blurry. We definitely want folks to be able to see. You can stop sharing, Nancy. And start. Is this better for folks?
Okay, we're getting a yes.
How do I turn on the closed captioning?
Oh, on Zoom, on the bottom, you'll see a bar with CC. So if you want to put that in present mode, the slides in present mode.
Oh, okay.
And then on the bottom, there should be that symbol CC to turn on the closed captioning.
All right, testing. Cool. Okay, so to get started, this is our overview and learning goals. Nancy, would you like to share them?
Yes, this is what we're doing today. We will be participating in conversations unpacking these concepts. We'll talk about allying actions. And the idea here is to reflect on what constitutes action in terms of doing social justice work, allying. How do we show up and demonstrate our support and solidarity? And is it enough? The next item is discomfort. So we'll ask you questions and survey you for your responses regarding how does discomfort, unease, tension, or fear show up from our positions of privilege and also from our marginalized identities. The next item is divestment. How can divestment affect our communities at large? Which leads us into a discussion of looking at these three concepts of allying actions, discomfort, divestment, and naming the social impact that these have on equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice work. Towards the end, we will also share resources, which includes upcoming programs, announcements, and we also encourage you to share and welcome what you want to share in the chat. And at the very end, we will do a survey. We always appreciate feedback that we get around these webinars, how we can grow, and how we can improve our presentations, and also include comments of what resonated with you and what could use work.
We also have some community values that we like to share with you all today. The 5 that I have listed are stay engaged. What that means, I know folks, it's lunchtime right now, so if you want to eat your lunch, that's totally cool. If you are tending to other things, that's fine, but as much as we can, if we can focus on the presentation, there will be some discussion questions as well, so the chat, we hope, will be active, so making sure to take all that into consideration, but also I recognize that folks have to do what they have to do. As well as lean into discomfort. Discomfort is one of the topics for today, so we want to name that. And I am a true believer that there is no growth without challenge, so we do want folks to lean into discomfort today in order to grow from it. Expect and accept a lack of closure, and what that means is that we only have an hour-long discussion today, so we're definitely not going to cover all aspects of allying actions, discomfort, and divestment. It is kind of an introduction conversation, so we won't necessarily feel closure at the end of it. So we want to name that as well. Naming that impact matters more than intention. So as folks come into the chat and share things, you might come with good intentions, but the impact is what will have a greater impact, what will matter more. And also share the air. And no, we're not physically sharing the air, but making sure that in the chat as folks share, make sure if you feel comfortable, please share, but also recognize if you are sharing a lot. And for folks who are less of a sharer, more introverted, make sure to challenge yourself as well to share when you have a thought, because we want to hear from everyone. Starting with the first question.
All right, we're asking you to think and respond to the following. Which allying actions have the greatest impact for social justice? And please share examples and put that in the chat. I'll do my best along with Izzy to read and share those comments and insights out loud. So we'll give you a moment to do that and also give you a moment to also review the comments.
All right, so we have listen more than you speak, listening, educating oneself, supporting anti-racism organizations with time and money, responsibility for one's impact, provide a space to hear, understand how one can most serve, coalitions, amplify, follow POC leaders and amplify their voices, learn to be an active bystander, talk to friends and others, give credit and amplify the voices again, and propose solutions from the community most directly impacted from the issue. Thank you. Use power to create structural and policy changes. Definitely a good one. Speak up for others. Dialogue, inform, teaching, listening, empathy, growth, and self. Addressing problematic comments, rhetorics in one's close circle, educating oneself instead of assuming the labor of the most oppressed group, listening and following instruction, believe experiences different than your own, acknowledge privilege, insisting on institutional changes.
Thank you all for sharing what you listed in the chat: listening, offering space, giving dollars to specific businesses, amplifying voices of people of color communities, creating space, believe experiences of others that are different from our own are all good for allying actions. One of the things that I also want to talk about is other actions that relate to participating in marches or protests, boycotting or divesting from companies, organizations, or even people. We talked already about supporting specific businesses, voting. At UCSD, we have definitely had our share of statements that were issued by departments, staff, faculty, student organizations condemning injustices at our local community as well as what's happening nationally. And sometimes there's a critique about holding spaces to have talks or these conversations. And I would argue that sometimes we need a starting point. And sometimes having these conversations can be the impetus to push for what some of you have mentioned as creating lasting change, structural changes to the policies, and making those practices institutionalized, and also making sure that we hold each other accountable for these actions. We also need to keep in mind when we're talking about participating in protests or marches that not everyone has the luxury, privilege, or access to do so. And that could be for several reasons. It could relate to reasons of feeling vulnerable or safety. Right now we're experiencing a pandemic, but certainly pre-pandemic, there were still factors that might impact one's ability to participate in marches or on the streets. That could still be related to feelings of vulnerability. There might be economic factors involved as well, or ability or mobility or ability issues to be able to fully participate in these marches and these protests. Thank you all for sharing.
And building off what you all shared and what Nancy has just shared, I wanted to name too that we intentionally named this presentation instead of allying, it's allying actions, and we do consider allyship to be a verb. And as you all mentioned, there's, when you're talking about being an ally, there's things that you do to be an ally, right? It's not just you say you're an ally and that's it. One example that we've been seeing around the country, around the nation, in response to the events that we're going through right now are book clubs starting up, especially reading books like, I'm blanking on the most popular one, like just books in general. So the Cross Cultural Center itself led a book club on Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis. There's also some on just to name books, How to Be an Anti-Racist, White Supremacy and Me, a whole bunch of different books that are important to read and are educational tools, but we want to make sure that we're taking steps beyond that, right? Taking steps beyond awareness and education. So I think there's been, in particular, what we were thinking about is this screenshot that was going around of just people in Zoom like holding up their books. And so we want to make sure that as we're reading and educating ourselves that we're taking actions again and enacting allyship being a verb. So there's also the notion of enoughness and who decides what is enough. There is, some discussion on, like I've mentioned, what is enough? What can you do to be the perfect ally? And we want to acknowledge that allying there is no end goal. You will always, it's a verb, it's a process, it's something that is ongoing, and there's no end stop where you've reached enough and where you can stop caring, when you can stop donating, just stop, period. It's a process, it's ongoing, and it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey if you want to be in action to whatever movement that you want to support. As you all mentioned in the chat, listening is one of the most important things that you can do as an ally. So listening versus speaking over or for. It's important to amplify the voices of those who are most marginalized, but we want to make sure not to speak for them or speak over them. So hand the mic, so to speak, in a figurative way to, again, amplify their voices, share what's already being shared by people of color leaders or organizations to support the work that's already being done instead of trying to speak for a certain group, especially if it's a group that you don't belong to.
And I'll go ahead and chime in there. Thanks, Izzy. I saw that somebody had put in the chat, White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo.
Yes, that was the book I was thinking of.
Yeah. And then the book club that we just finished for staff is Our Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis. I'll go ahead and chime in on allying as a verb. And it's important to note that allying work is always going to be a work in progress, that we need to continue educating ourselves, and also not to expect or assume that folks in marginalized position will teach us or teach us on demand. Also, allying work involves someone who is seeking to empower all, that you have sustainable actions, that you're doing it for the future as security. Also, in allying work, a person who is dedicated and committed is also willing to seek critique and feedback, acknowledging that that is a part of the work, and that we also work towards disrupting, dismantling, reimagining, redefining socialization or cycles of oppression, systems of injustice, systems of exclusion. And also to add what Izzy was saying about listening versus speaking over or for, there's an author who has done work, Keith Edwards, who's done work on aspiring social justice ally identity development. And in this outline, Keith Edwards describes the different forms of allying development. So one can be an ally to a person. I can speak up against injustices for a person that I care about, whether that person is a close friend or a family member. This kind of allying may not necessarily call out or recognize systemic injustice. Then there's another type of allying in which someone may claim to be an ally to the target group and may speak for them rather than with them. And this person may also have a hard time receiving feedback or critique, and they in some cases expect a good pat on the back for a job well done. And in being an ally for social justice work, again, you are working with target groups. You're acknowledging your own privileges and using your privilege to further social progress, social equity, and social justice. Right, next slide. We'd like to take this opportunity to do another survey. So if you can put in the chat your initial thoughts and responses when you hear this term performative allyship, whether you're familiar with the term or not, and we'll give you a few moments to put your responses in the chat and also give you some time to read the 3 commentaries that are included on this slide. 2 of them are from Fortune magazine, and in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see that says "Working While Black," and then the middle commentary is a tweet around performative allyship. So again, if you can write your comments, your thoughts about performative allyship, give you a few moments.
I saw a note that it is blurry again. I can read out if folks need or zoom in. But the one on the left corner says, "My bank was under public scrutiny for racist acts. They put out a well-written statement internally. Days passed with no commentary or check-ins on how I felt about the matter from any of my coworkers." Not one. From Monica, 25. There's a tweet in the middle from Lil Sasquatch. "Reminder that posting a black square on Instagram but not signing any petitions and not donating when you have the money is not activism in any way. It's literally participating in an Instagram challenge and doing the bare minimum. Do more and do better." And on the right, there is, "While working at a women-led company, I became fully aware of what racism looked like in a workplace setting. If all of your managers and executive team members are white, but you're telling your customers you are all for women's rights and inclusivity, you're lying, simply put." From Brianna, 33.
I'll go ahead and read the chat comments. Posting on Instagram such as the black square, but not actually doing the work behind the scenes. These folks see quote unquote allyship as a trend. Talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Making noise to get quote credit without doing work to affect systemic change. Posting things on social media, yes. Performative allyship can be pretty harmful since it is public facing. These performative acts makes it seem as though these people's spaces are safe for BIPOC or other marginalized groups and may, as a result, seek entrance only to find the space mismatches between what is publicly stated and the lived experiences of people with the institution. It's more about people's perceptions than doing the actual work. Looks like we have a couple more. Companies who put out pretty EDI statements but don't address the inequities and injustices within their own organizations, as is reflected in these commentaries on the slide. Only being active in social media but not being part of the solution by being present at protests, boycotts, etc. Thank you all for sharing. That's a perfect segue into further describing what performative allyship is, in which you captured in your comments. So you can think of performative allyship as sort of this optical, transactional, surface allyship that is usually and only meant to be seen. And you mentioned some of the practices here. That includes posting photos on Instagram or social media, crafting words as a show of solidarity, sometimes receiving or wanting to receive pat on the back for being a good person, getting a reward. And again, without the concerted efforts of making sustainable change or structural changes, and again, holding our institutions accountable for the statements that they put out. There's definitely value in hearing those statements, and it's certainly understandable that we want to show people that we care, but if it's not backed up by substantive action, then it's meaningless, right? And that's what these comments are complaining about.
Yes, and to add a note, as we have on the slide with the rainbow behind performative allyship, it's something that, as someone said in the chat, companies putting out like pretty EDI statements or institution putting out pretty statements. It's something that looks good. It's something that is about perception, as someone said. And in reality, like I said, allyship is an ongoing process that takes a while. And as I mentioned even earlier, there is no growth without challenge. So sometimes it can look ugly. It can make us feel uncomfortable. So our next question to you all is, what role does discomfort have in social justice work? I see some chat already. It's critical to learning, to the learning and often unlearning that allows us to move forward. You can't grow or change without risk and making mistakes. That's uncomfortable. Provide space to question societal norms. It's critical because it requires internal reflection and self-accountability when addressing complicitness in these systems of oppression. We have to not only accept our discomfort, but analyze and change through it. Yes, so these are all great answers. And as you all said, it's important to not only feel discomfort, but as one of our community values is to lean into it, analyze it and think through why that is, how you can change, how you can continue learning.
And I'll add to that too, from the perspective of someone who has privileged identities. Sometimes there might be fear of losing power to others that can translate to competition for jobs. Sometimes discomfort or fear can feed into bias that can have implications for hiring, that in turn can have implications for having diverse representation in leadership positions. And then you all shared discomfort as the foundation for why we are doing social justice work, right? And so it has to also do with, what do we do with that discomfort? Does it paralyze us? Do we stop in our tracks? Do we stop engaging? Do we use discomfort as an opportunity for growth and learning? And we have to realize that we have agency in what we want to do with that discomfort. And social justice work is messy, it's sensitive, it's delicate. I think Izzy mentioned that it can get ugly. Are we willing to sit with that?
And I do want to acknowledge the last chat about it. Discomfort is a sign that we are expanding the boundaries of our established beliefs and paradigms, therefore leading to changes in our behaviors, actions, and increased levels of understanding. It's a great way to put it. We're going to show a video about discomfort disclosure. It is a few minutes long, so if you were waiting to eat because you were wanting to be active in the chat, this is a great time to take a few bites.
Laverne Cox, welcome to the Daily Social Distancing Show.
Everyone here.
Thank you so much. It's so, this is wild. This is so interesting, this whole.
It's a very strange experience, yes? Have you gotten used to just meeting and talking to everybody like this?
I have, and I kind of prefer it. Can I tell you, before coronavirus, I never did video chats. Like when I would meet guys on dating apps, I would always want to just meet in person. Now it's a prerequisite. Now we have to video chat. And it's a great way to pre-screen. So now I'm going to be pre-screening all my potential dates via video chat. So thank you, COVID-19.
Wait, okay, help me understand this though. What do you think you get from the video chat that you wouldn't have gotten in person? Or is it just for you that you don't have to go to the in-person because you've done the video chat? Is that what it is?
You save time. You eliminate a lot of people that you would have like wasted time going to meet. And so like you kind of know in like, 3 to 5 minutes if it's going to be a match. So it's just it's a pre-screen.
You have always been, one of the loudest and proudest LGBTQ activists out there. Like you became just like the archetype for what people hoped trans people could achieve, not just in acting, but in any field. You've come out with a new documentary now that you are a part of and you've produced as well, and it's called Disclosure. And what I loved about it is it's a documentary taking us through how trans people have been portrayed by Hollywood and the entertainment industry for so long. Tell me why you chose to go with this route.
I am obsessed with looking back in history and to help us understand why we are where we are now. And there's so much that hasn't been done around looking at trans history on so many different levels. And because my work is in the media and I'm obsessed with media and want to do better and want the media to do better, it made a lot of sense.
We don't even think about it. From the time we're kids, we're receiving images and video, and we just start to assemble the world in our minds. There's no denying that trans has for a very long time been a punchline. Trans has been, always displayed as the other, the scary, the punchline. It's been this thing. Over the past few years, we've started seeing the change. But when you look at it as somebody who is trans, have you seen a big change? Has that change been enough?
Enough is relative, right? Like one of the things that film grapples with is that there is indeed unprecedented representation of trans folks in the media that really probably began about 6 years ago. And our director, Sam Fader, noted that whenever there's increased visibility of a marginalized community, there's often backlash and there's often increased violence. And that is exactly what we're seeing with the increased murders of Black trans women and with the legislative assault as well. So yes, things have gotten better in terms of visibility, and then there has been a backlash that we're seeing. And I think one of the most critical things that we should all remember is how the technique of divide and conquer works to divide marginalized people, right? So that I was so beautifully moved when I saw that protest for Black trans lives, right? A little over a week ago. And
in Brooklyn,
so many people, and here in LA as well, where folks were declaring that Black trans lives matter, that we understand that all Black folks are affected by systemic racism and that we have to come together, and all marginalized people have to come together.
Here's a question I have for you that's a difficult one, and I would only ask you because I'm comfortable with you. But how do you think we get to the place where people can acknowledge their discomfort and their misunderstanding of a thing whilst not offending or discriminating against the other person? How would you encourage that? In the same way we're having conversations around race, how would you say to people, hey, let's try and encourage just a movement in and around trans awareness?
I think we have to really learn how to sit with discomfort, period, right? I think whenever we are called upon to interrogate our internalized racism, our internalized transphobia, and we all internalize these things as Americans, probably as citizens of the world. And so we each have to be able to sit with that discomfort. I think so often when we come up against something that is uncomfortable for us, often we go into this defense mode. We go into fight, flight, or freeze. Oh my God, someone called me transphobic. Then I have to immediately defend that instead of taking a breath and taking a moment and sitting with the discomfort of maybe being called out. Maybe you weren't wrong, maybe you were. We all have to struggle. So I think a lot of it's about learning how to sit with discomfort, not going into fight, flight, or freeze, so we can actually hear what the criticism and the critique is, and then understanding that being uncomfortable does not mean that you are unsafe, right? So there's a difference between with the bathroom conversation just makes me think so much about because for several years it was all about bathrooms, banning people from bathrooms, right? In the segregated South, white folks were not comfortable with Black people in the bathroom with them, but did that mean that they were unsafe? And so what does it mean for us to sit with discomfort? What does it mean for us to really ask ourselves, are we not safe or are we just uncomfortable?
I know you've been working on programs to try and help trans people break into the industry, just behind the cameras, and you're really pushing for how trans people are portrayed on screen. What are the big changes you think we need to make?
I think the piece is, how do we have diverse people in positions of power, right? One of the things I'm most proud of with Disclosure is that everyone on screen is trans, and most of the people working behind the scenes on the crew are also trans. And in the case when we couldn't find someone trans to fill a role, we had a fellowship program where we had a cisgender person train the trans person. But it's not just about what Cornel West calls putting black faces in high places, right? It's not just about, sort of putting, diverse people in the same sort of corrupt systems. We have to change the way that power works. And so much of that is about, I believe, changing the material conditions of poor and working people, the people who are the most marginalized, to get them, opportunities to work in the industry behind the scenes, and then be truly elevated to positions of power, to not just occupy the same sort of, corrupt systems, but to change the system.
Laverne Cox, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Trevor. No, it's good to see you again.
Great seeing you.
All right, so I'll go over some takeaways from the Disclosure documentary interview with Trevor Noah and Laverne Cox. Trevor Noah talks about trans as being labeled as other, as scary, and this has broader implications throughout history, through today, where we have patterns of excluding others because of foreignness, because of not belonging, or fitting our schema of not belonging. And right, that's what xenophobia is, right? You have a fear of otherness or a fear of the strange. And then also thinking about ways that we exclude identities and vilify identities based on difference or based on a perceived threat. Trevor Noah also mentions that there are images that assemble our worldview, which is also another way of saying we are inundated with images, especially in this age of social media, in how we make meaning of the world and how we make meaning around identities and people. And this is another reminder of needing to do deeper dive into research and educating ourselves, talking about articles or books or even the news, and really questioning the source of that information, which really matters. Laverne Cox also comments that, yes, there is an unprecedented representation of trans folks in media, and with that also comes an increase in invisibility of marginalized folks, also an increase in violence, which also signals to us that some of these acts of aggression and acts of violence also stem from fear, from hatred, from discomfort. So locating discomfort within aggressive acts is something that we need to address as well. And Laverne Cox also says in the very beginning, she likes to look at history to find out how we got here. When it comes to calling out or naming problematic behavior, Laverne Cox says that sometimes we have this tendency to react in fight, flight, or freeze mode. Instead, she says we need to use this as an opportunity for growth, to sit with that discomfort, lean into discomfort, and really pause as a moment to self-reflect. And again, I wanted to reiterate what I said earlier, is that we have agency in what we do with that discomfort. Also, comfortability is a privilege. We must be willing, as allying or doing allying work, we must be willing to engage in those tough conversations, and we must work to acknowledge our own privileges and then take accountability for our actions, and in some cases give ourselves grace for learning. I think there are definitely times when it may be appropriate to call folks in, and there may be times when it might be more effective to call people out. That's all very contextual in how we respond to such feedback and critique. We also have this habit sometimes of implementing polite language so that the other person can feel comfortable. And sometimes that kind of behavior can be contested. There can be definitely a big difference, for example, with talking about bias, or me saying, let's talk about your bias, versus me saying, let's talk about your racism. right? So being mindful too of the way high emotions are attached and perceived, especially when we're doing social justice work. It's very much attached to emotions. There's emotional labor involved. And we need to be mindful then about discomfort. I think Laverne Cox says, does being uncomfortable equate to being unsafe, or do we perceive being uncomfortable as being threatened? I'll talk next about divestment, which is on the next slide.
Yes, so our next question for you all is, how does divestment work? Examples. I know divestment is typically talked about in terms of oil or divesting from oil pipelines or oil companies, but we are talking about it in the general sense. One message says not supporting or withdrawing financial support from institutions that promote racist practices. Haven't heard that word before. That's definitely an example. Yes, to give some more examples, also boycotting companies that have policies that don't pay their employees enough. Yes, so one example, Driscoll Berries is one I can think of. The company is oppressive to the farm workers who pick them. And so divestment to me is not purchasing Driscoll products to support the workers. I also engage in that boycott as well. Other examples.
I'll chime in here. If we can think of divestment, yes, in terms of economy and not financially supporting certain companies or corporations, but also divestment in terms of what are we doing away with? What are we disposing of? Who benefits from divestment?
Mm-hmm. One example, someone wrote, again, not participating in conversations that are racist, just flat out say that you aren't going to stick around for that joke. Another idea, not investing of wealth and resources from corporations and organizations that invest in oppressive systems, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS, from companies that support the Israeli apartheid.
I'll go ahead and chime in here too. When we're talking about divestment in terms of doing away with X, doing away with behavior or an action, you know, we can think of folks who divest from wearing masks, right? Folks who claim that wearing masks might be or feels like an infringement of their freedom. And when we take an action like that, we have to ask, who does this impact? Who does this harm?
And one last chat was recognizing that there are times where you need to sacrifice your own privilege. And to speak a little bit more about that, when we were thinking about divestment, we recognized that money is power. And I came up with this sort of formula that the idea is that if you support a company, that means you're supporting the CEO, which means that you're supporting what the CEO supports. So some examples that we have listed are the Redskins and their recent announcement that they will be changing their name, which came as a result of financial pressure that was put on them, I think in particular by FedEx. And then this tweet, I have this tweet that says, oh, look, it's the sound of me Googling how to make your own adobo as a result of the Goya, I think it's president or CEO, coming out and saying in support of the Trump administration. So these are two recent examples of divestment and boycotting and the results of that. I'm not sure if there's any, solid evidence of how, if Goya has been impacted by a boycott at all, but the Redskins have finally announced that they will be changing their name. And we can kind of recognize there, again, the power of money. And it's been years that folks have been asking and protesting the Redskins and naming that it's a racist slogan. And it's just until 2020 that they decided to change their name, right? And it's due to, again, financial pressure. So again, money is definitely power. I think Amazon is also another company that folks are deciding to boycott. And that brings up the notion of privilege and convenience. And it's very easy to order something on Amazon, especially if you have Prime, it's going to come in 2 days. You don't have to go to the store, especially right now that folks are afraid of being sick. But that convenience comes at a sacrifice. As someone mentioned about companies that have policies that are not supportive of their workers, it's well known that Amazon warehouse workers and delivery folks are under a lot of pressure, don't get enough breaks, and are underpaid. And they are right now responsible for so many different shipments of so many different things and are under that time pressure as well again. So it's not a good company, and folks are deciding to boycott them. And again, it's not clear if that's having an impact, but as we've seen with the Redskins, with other companies as well who have made decisions, money is power. So boycotts have shown to be effective, but we also want to talk about divestment in terms of divesting from ideology. So in a bigger picture. So as Nancy mentioned, what aspects of our society can we do away with? How can we change the way that we think and challenge the binary thinking that is so prominent in our society? You're either good or bad, female or male. There's so many different binaries that we have in our society. So we need to be able to challenge the way that we think and change the way that we think. We also need to make sure, as we're divesting from corporations and these ideologies, that we're investing in our communities, which means buying local if we have small general stores, and also supporting community organizations. I think there's definitely been a lot of that in these times of folks trying to support small businesses, ordering takeout from small restaurants instead of chains, doing what they can to support their local community. I see a message in the chat. Yes. So we need to divest from the ideologies that are so prominent in our society. And as we can look back and recognize the way that we're taught, if you were taught in America, the United States curriculum, or at least in California, when I went to school, I was taught about the missions and, the colonization of California without it being called the colonization of California. And I didn't know how that played a role into that, especially being Native myself. I would not have, built a mission if I knew. There's also things that we're not taught about, like the Japanese internment that happened in California. I think Southern states have curriculum that doesn't acknowledge the real history behind the Civil War, and they call it the War of Northern Aggression. So all of these things are taught to us, right? And we have to now learn, look back, and divest from the ideologies that have shaped the way that we think. As someone mentioned, literature is important to building empathy and understanding. And I know that I mentioned book clubs are not the only step, but it's definitely a way to start unlearning. So I know when I'm a UCSD alum, and when I came to Marshall College and took the Dimension of Culture course and read history from a different mirror, which is basically history from a different perspective by Ronald Takaki, that really shifted my mindset. So again, engaging in things that challenge the way that we think, that may feel us uncomfortable because that's a way that we've grown. So we're again shifting away from that. I see the chat is active.
Someone had said that we don't usually learn the bad part or the ugly parts of our history until we get to higher education.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important. I watched Hamilton recently when it came out. And in Hamilton, they talk about, who writes our history, right? That's something definitely important to think about when it comes to how is our history framed, and then who are the authors that write our legacy. On the topic of divesting from ideologies, I think there's something in the chat about thinking about or rethinking about decolonized minds as an example. Someone had written in the chat, defunding police, which can also sometimes be misunderstood or a misnomer, because the other side of that is then investing in social services work, reinvesting in education, increasing access to resources for disenfranchised communities. We can also think of divestment in terms of cancel culture, right? When we are on social media, sometimes we will cancel friends whose values may not be aligned with our own. And sometimes around those kinds of behaviors, we can ask ourselves, is the investment in this relationship or friendship worth the relationship or worth the return that you're getting from that? Sometimes also having choices is a privilege, right? When we talk about good, better, best options or practices, you know, we definitely appreciate getting a good bargain. If you're having to decide about supporting like Amazon, Walmart, Target, or Target, we need to keep in mind that there are folks who may not have that luxury of choosing and are trying to survive. So we need to think about those layers of complexities and those layers of having access to different kinds of resources. All right, so bringing it all together, there's certainly some overlap and layerings around allying actions. Is it sustainable? Does it lead to institutional lasting change? I've said this before, are we using discomfort as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity for some transformative learning? Are we using our privilege? Is it enough to acknowledge our privilege? What are we doing with that privilege? And then Izzy also mentioned divestment means investing in learning materials, companies or corporations, investing in having a diverse group of people around you, even though their insights or values may not always match, but there's definitely value in surrounding yourself with differing insights. This is a chart that maps out what authentic allying looks like. On the bottom, it says committed to anti-racist work. We know that that can also be broadened to include other kinds of isms, ableism, sexism, classism, for example. But a good reminder of practicing empathy, practicing learning the stories and histories and the herstories of communities. Again, sitting and leaning into that discomfort, knowing that it's not about you, and then not virtue signaling, taking real action. That's what we were talking about earlier about performative allyship. And then constantly checking in with oneself and practicing self-awareness around our own privileges and using it to further social equity, progress, and social justice.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think the way that I like to think about it, especially since I'm into gardening and plants, is that there's this white supremacist, colonial, patriarchal pot and soil that we've all grown in, or that we were planted in as a seed, and now we're growing out of it. We're repotting ourselves, we're changing our soil, we're adding in all the different things that we've mentioned, literature, actions, joining community organizations, doing work, spending our money in the right ways, or planting our own seeds in the right pots. So it is something that's uncomfortable that we have to grow through. And I think, as Nancy mentioned, all of these things are interlined, and it's complex, and it's challenging. And like I said before, it's messy at times. So we're all going through it together. And we wanted to share with you all some programs and resources for folks who, I know some folks here engaged in the Cross Cultural Center's Summer Reading Club. Thank you for those who did. We also have a student version that has our last meeting on August 10th. So if you'd like to share that with any of your students. We also have another equity talk on Wednesday, August 26th, from same time from 12 to 1. That is a 301 on how woke is your wokeness. The registration link is there.
And I'll talk about what I mentioned earlier. Keith Edwards is the author of a piece called Aspiring Social Justice Ally Identity Development. It's really helpful to have the language to describe some of the allying or forms of allying that are happening around us. Earlier, I mentioned being an ally for a person doesn't necessarily mean that you are allying for systemic social justice or advocating for structural change necessarily. What's also on here is our summer staff celebration called Triton Staff Strong, which is taking place this year. It's usually held for one day, but this year we're doing it over 3 days, August 18th, which is Tuesday, through Thursday, August 20th. That first day there will be trivia contests, be a crafting demo on Wednesday, and then a talent show on August 20th. The plan is to have this activity from 8 to 5. I believe it's 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. There's also a social networking hour one of these days. I believe that'll happen in the early evening around 4 o'clock. I think it's 4 to 5:30. And an announcement will be made on social media and to staff folks, so be on the lookout for that. Izzy, am I missing anything else? Did we talk about the 21 day?
No, if you want to talk about that.
Sure. Be on the lookout for UCSD Chancellor's 20-day anti-racism challenge that is coming up soon in August. Why is it 21 days? According to Dr. Eddie Moore, it takes 21 days to form a habit, and the idea is to form these lasting habits around learning about social justice and injustices and equity.
Yes, and if you all have any resources or programs you'd like to share in the chat, we can make note of them and save the chat if we want to share it out to folks that are here, and I can read them out as well. As you think of things, I will share with you all the survey. If we wish you could, if we would like you to take this survey, you can scan the QR code. There's also this link, which I will put in the chat for easy access. And I see there's some messages as well, so I'll take a look at those. The library has a guide to anti-racism resources. Yes.
So that is a link for our staff survey. If you have access to your phone, you can use your phone's camera to scan the QR code, and that'll bring up the survey. That is a short survey, so I hope you'll take time to fill that out. Thank you for your patience and bearing with us as we address some of our technology glitches along the way. Certainly appreciate that. Izzy and I will stay on for a few moments.
I just put the link in the chat, folks who are waiting for it. Thank you all for joining. I see we do have a few folks on. Please let us know if you have any questions or other things to share.